Consecutive governments have failed to grasp and respond to the scale of the threat posed by China. Parliament's spy agency watchdog said yesterday, warning Chinese intelligence targets the UK prolifically and aggressively. A new and wide-ranging report by the Intelligence and Security Committee, the ISC, is critical of the UK government's response to the threat, questioning the trade-off between economic interest and security concerns. This is Alex Phillips' favourite subject. And joining us now is Bob Seeley, Conservative MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Bob, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you. Good morning to your listeners' viewers.
Lovely to have you on. Tell me about this report, because Alex Phillips is literally... she has been champing at the bit since 6:30 to talk to you about this.
I mean, it's what can I say? It's completely banged various governments to rights over the years, and is incredibly damning. And it says all the stuff that people like myself and Ian Duncan Smith and others, Damien Green, have been worrying about for years. That we don't have a coherent approach to China, and China is a lot more antagonistic and aggressive to our country than we would like to believe.
Has it always been that way? Because, of course, I'll shut up. Because it's always been Russia, right?
I started writing a book on this back in 2006. I was 22 years old. I'd been living in Ghana and watching how China had essentially been raping and pillaging Africa and thinking, this is bad. They're taking over all of the minerals. They're going to control shipping routes. At the same time, just after, I came back from Ghana back to the UK, we had austerity. And what did Cameron and Osborne do? Sold half of the country to the Chinese. It was an utter disaster. I remember speaking to someone, I won't mention his name, but extremely high up in the intelligence agencies. And he said to me once, I had done an interview with him, he said to me once off camera, the two people who must be held the most responsible for a risk to national security are Cameron and Osborne. And we still don't have a cohesive strategy now. We don't. The problem is we're in a Gordian knot now. Do you know what I mean? We've given so much infrastructure to China. When we then turn around and go, oh, we're not going to let you build 5G networks or all the rest of it, they say, right, we're going to pull the plug on investment into nuclear. We have used China and Beijing as an easy get-out all the time without developing our own resources, without having any sort of sensible geopolitical strategy, without putting proper foreign direct investment in Africa rather than writing blank cheques to dictators. We have not had a sensible foreign policy when it comes to national security and the crossover with trade and the crossover with our economy for decades. And I'm afraid it's actually too late now. And thank goodness we do have the Bob Seeleys and the Ian Duncan Smiths and the Tom Tugendhats who are alive to this, but they don't seem to be able to get their message up to the very top, and that frightens me.
Bob Seeley?
I agree with parts of what Alexander said. I don't think it's beyond repair yet, because we got Huawei. I and others campaigned to get Huawei out of the system a few years ago, and that's worked. So when you stand up and take a much more robust approach to China, they reluctantly respect you, but they do so. What we need to do is work out quite how bad our trade dependency is. And I would love the government to have an annual statement of trade dependency. We're not there yet. We need to keep pushing until we get that. And there are other things that we can do. We can slowly get them out of our critical national infrastructure, as well as other key bits of the economy. But you're right, it's going to be difficult. The deeper the relationship, the more difficult it is. And we have to live with China. It is a superpower and it is a trading nation. But it's a question of how we can protect ourselves much better than we do, but also be much more robust in defending our values.
Bob, do you agree with Alex that Cameron and Osborne started this by allowing Chinese investment and the power they wield to take over our infrastructure? Was that, looking back, fair blame to be laid at their door?
Up to a point. Actually, the rot started with Huawei, for example. The rot started with Huawei's relationship with British Telecom back under New Labour. And New Labour didn't even look and consider whether it was a security risk or look at the long-term implications. At the time, ministers weren't even told it was happening. So either the civil servants were very sloppy or the Labour...
Oh, you can't imagine civil servants being sloppy. Aren't they all busy in court trying to destroy the Rwanda policy?
Very possibly. I couldn't. That's unfair. That's unfair. So it may have started with Labour, but for sure, Cameron and Osborne had a somewhat amoral and naive approach to foreign relationships, not only with China, but with Russia. And we've seen where the Russia policy has ended up. So the danger is that we will become so indebted to the Chinese that when they invade Taiwan and they effectively separate the European Union and the UK from the United States, then we will effectively, in order to side with our key allies like the US, we will have to effectively collapse our economy because of the damage to world trade that sanctions on China, should it invade Taiwan, would cause. So the more dependent we become, the more dangerous it is. And we have to understand that dependency. We're not there yet.
I think it's scarier than that. I mean, I agree with absolutely everything Bob's just said, but I think it's scarier. If you now look at the axis of when you look at the countries who are getting together, selling each other weapons, selling each other oil, doing naval operations together, you've now got a situation where Russia, China, Iran, even a bit of South Africa, all linking together. China has basically, with predatory mercantilism, secured a lot of territory all down the eastern flank of Africa, as well as all the resources inside Africa. I think that, and I've heard this from a lot of people in the intelligence services here and in America, the end goal is controlling shipping. It's controlling naval passages. And that way, you saw what happened in Ukraine when you can't get grain out of the country, when you can't get gas out of the country.
Sure.
You control the world if you control shipping routes.
Why is it then? You're on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Bob. You, Alex, have studied this. Why is there always and still a concentration in this country? Obviously, Russia has invaded Ukraine. I get that, but growing up, I always knew about the Cold War. Giving you my experience as a kid brought up by two parents who I guess were quite conservative, but they never talked about a threat from China. It was always Russia. Russia was the enemy. That still seems to me to be the rhetoric today, doesn't it? What you're trying to say, Bob, and you, is we need to think outside the box. We need to change people's concerns and get them to question this regime and its motives, right?
China is a more subtle threat. That is undoubtedly true. Yeah. Russia is a very obvious threat now, although, before the war, there were plenty of people who say, Russia, what's the problem? So what we've seen is what happens when we appease dictatorships, just like the 1930s. And although each era is different, when the Western nations don't defend their values and interests and, frankly, fair trade, we all suffer. China, as I say, is a more complex threat. It is a major trading power in the way that Russia isn't, because effectively Russia is a supermarket for raw materials and not a lot else. China seeks to dominate economically many areas of the global economy. They're doing it using unfair methods. They're doing it by unfair support for their own industries, which are always state, even when they're private. They're doing it by collapsing and undercutting Western industry. Huawei did it initially back with a Canadian firm, I think Nortel, in the early 2000s. So these are more complex issues when it comes to dealing with trading rules and the abuse of trading rules. And clearly, when China offers really, really cheap products, lots of economies around the world and lots of businesses and companies would want to take it with few questions asked. And that's therefore the role for government to say, hold on a second, we need free trade with free nations, not allowing China to abuse the rules of the World Trade Organization to collapse other people's firms, to collapse other people's economies or dominate them unfairly in order to gain political and geostrategic advantage. So one is dealing with more complex issues, but government needs to be more robust because of that and to think more in the long term. And another bit of Sir Julian Lewis's excellent report that we're talking about now was to point out that China thinks long term, or China's leaders thinking long term in a way that we're simply not. So we need to start thinking long term, and we need to start understanding and getting more people on side to understand the threat.
Yeah, quick thing I want to add, Bob's absolutely right about all of that, but Brexit is our big opportunity to do this, because when we were in the EU we couldn't decide what sort of state aid we gave to critical sectors. We couldn't do any of this. We had no control over our own trade
Europe
policy.
was controlling what we did,
and trade is so important in geopolitics. Now what we've got to do actually is start using some of the levers of Brexit, start distancing ourselves from EU rule, because Macron is so compromised by China. He is so compromised by China, and basically says that the West shouldn't be following the US lead on this, and that we've actually got to be closer to Beijing. We've seen how compromised Germany were by Russia. We cannot follow the lead of the continent on this one because they're getting it wrong. We need to be using our independence to set up a sort of cross-section of geopolitical strategy with trade strategy, which will boost our economy and help security in the world.
Let's hope the government's more robust. I can't let you go without you asking, because I want to see your face when I say this to you, Bob Seeley. Boris Johnson couldn't remember his PIN number for those WhatsApp messages. Your response to that?
I find that, having known Boris a little bit, I find that reasonably believable, actually.
Brilliant answer, my friend. Thank you, Bob Seeley, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, talking about that threat from China.